What if the hometown of Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, was the site of a brutal race riot? In 1908, Springfield, Illinois, proved that even in the North, no place was safe for black families. Follow to learn about the history that created the NAACP. Springfield, 1908. A black man was falsely accused of a crime, and a mob of thousands of white residents demanded his lynching. When they couldn't find him, they went on a rampage, destroying black neighborhoods and businesses. They dragged two innocent black men from their homes and lynched them. Black families fled in terror, and the state militia had to be called in to stop the violence. The entire nation was shocked, not just by the violence itself, but because it happened in the city of Lincoln, a place that was supposed to be a symbol of freedom. The Springfield Riot of 1908 shattered the myth of Northern racial innocence and forced a national reckoning. It was an act of terror that showed a new generation of activists that the government was unwilling or unable to protect black people from mob violence. Out of this destruction and despair, a new, more organized form of resistance was born. The outrage directly led to the founding of the NAACP, an organization that would use legal and political action to fight for civil rights for the next century. Did you know the NAACP started because of this riot? What do you think? Like and share this video and follow for more untold history.
They fought back during racial terror. In August 1908, Springfield, Illinois erupted in violence as white mobs targeted black neighborhoods, fueled by racist rumors and deep-seated resentment. But this time, black residents refused to be silent victims. Families quickly barricaded their homes, stood shoulder to shoulder, and armed themselves with whatever they could find to defend their community. Powerful images show black fathers standing guard at windows, mothers shielding their children, and neighbors forming protective lines in the streets. As the mob advanced, black defenders fired warning shots, forcing attackers to retreat and rethink their assault. Using their intimate knowledge of the neighborhood streets, they coordinated escapes and established safe havens. Churches and community halls became sanctuaries, led by courageous black leaders who rallied their people to stand strong and united. Their fierce resistance saved countless lives, even as the violence raged on. Springfield's black community showed the nation that unity, courage, and determination could challenge the forces of hate and terror. Their fight echoes through history, a powerful testament to black resilience and the unbreakable spirit of a people determined to protect their homes. This is the story of the Springfield 1908 Black Resistance.
Shalom. First and foremost, I want to open up by giving all the praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well and preach his truth and truth sincerity. Shalom to the hopeful elect. This is the brother Amawan Ayash from the GMS Indianapolis camp, coming back at you with another quick lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. And today's lesson is going to be another installment of our camp series here in the GMS Indianapolis camp, entitled For Thy Violence Against Thy Brother Jacob, which is directly quoted from the book of Obadiah, chapter 1, which is only one chapter, and verse 10, where within this series, we dig up stories within, mainly, U.S. history, as ultimately, here in the land of America. This is the main land, of the captivity of the Israelites here in these latter days. As you know, that ultimately, we as a people, we've been scattered across the four corners of the earth. So you have Israelites, captive in all parts, of the earth, throughout the four corners of the earth. But as far as the mass majority, or as far as the bulk of the Israelites are being captive here in these last days, the mass majority of the Israelites are held captive here in the land of America today. And within this series, we'll go through, the racial history, within the United States that has been, committed against our people, against the Lord's chosen people, being the so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans today. All right. And when we go through these things, it serves as a testament and a witness against Esau, Edom, all right, for the violence that he's committed against the Lord's chosen people. And it goes to show why, at the end of the day, all right, Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, he's not getting out the judgment that the Lord Yahweh Bashim Yahushai has foreordained for him. You know? So let's go ahead and open up with the book of Obadiah, chapter 1, okay? And verse 10. It says, "For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever." You see, and this is what's getting ready to happen unto Esau, Edom, the so-called white man. All right, when you go into the book of Obadiah, all right, it is ultimately prophecy against Esau, Edom, the so-called white man. All right, it goes into the judgment that the Lord is getting ready to bring upon Edom, and the reason why the Lord is getting ready to bring this judgment upon Edom. Okay, and it all goes back to the violence that he's committed against the Lord's chosen people, the so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, all right, who are indeed the Israelites of the Bible. And the recompense that, the Lord Yahweh Bashim Yahushai is getting ready to bring upon this devil, right, for putting his hands upon us, is what? That ultimately his whole nation is going to be cut off forever. And we're on about, I want to say, number 230 something. You see, and we just keep finding these stories, and you can't get around it, man. Once again, all this, serves as a testament and a witness against Esau, Edom, the so-called white man. You see? So, what we read through, the stories we get into, man, all right, it's plain as day as to why the Lord Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, all right, said that ultimately he's not going to turn away the punishment from Edom. Okay, because look at everything that this nation of devils, right, has done unto us, man. Amos chapter 1 and verse 11. It says, "Thus saith the Lord Yahweh Bahashem Yahushai, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof. Because he did pursue his brother with the sword," which, Edom's brother, being us, Jacob, all right, the Israelites, the so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, right? It says what? Because he did pursue his brother with the sword, and we're going to get that in, we're going to get Esau's blessing, all right, in Genesis the 27th chapter, the Lord's will, all right, because we know Esau's blessing, right? Isaac told him what? By thy sword shalt thou live, and also by his sword Esau is living, right? He does nothing but execute violence and evil in the planet Earth. And how does he do that? By way of the force of the sword. It says, because he did pursue his brother with the sword and did cast off all pity, and his anger did tear perpetually. You see, perpetually means everlasting, It says what? And he kept his wrath forever, you see. And when we go to Genesis chapter 27, all right, and verse 40, starting verse 40, the point is in 41. It says, "And by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck." Right? It said what? By thy sword shalt thou live. So when we fast forward to today, we know ultimately Esau, Edom, so-called white man, he's doing nothing but waging war in the planet Earth, man. Going to other countries, trying to establish, his democracies, right? His philosophies and ways of living, around the 4 corners of the planet Earth, man. Trying to, take hold, of the other nations' resources and things of that nature. Okay, and how is he doing that? By the force of the sword. He's living by his sword. Okay, verse 41. "And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him." You see, it says what? "And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob." And do we not just read in Amos 1 that his anger did tear perpetually and he kept his wrath forever, right? So even to this very day, all right, this sentiment, all right, is within the heart of Esau, Edom, the so-called white man. All right, Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, he's still holding his anger against the children of Israel, okay, to this very day. And we've seen it carried out, especially in U.S. history, man. You know, when we go into these various different, race riots / massacres, okay, these various different lynchings that have taken place, throughout the course of U.S. history, okay, that is Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, exacting violence, right, upon the children of Israel. Which all these things that we go into, all right, Esau, Edom, the so-called white man is getting ready to have to pay for that, man. So within today's lesson, for thy violence against thy brother Jacob, all right, here we have from blackpast.org, Springfield Race Riot of 1908. And as we get into the article, it reads, in mid-August 1908, the white population of Springfield, Illinois, hastily reacted to reports that a white woman has been assaulted in her home by a black man. You see, and a lot of times when these, massacres and, riots and things of that nature take place, right, lynchings, it's all rooted in a false accusation, right, brought up by a so-called white woman. Really, when you go into history, the so-called white woman, all right, has been feeling the Israelite man for a hot minute, what a lot of times, oftentimes, right, the so-called white woman will make, advances, toward the so-called black man, and what will happen is, right, the so-called white man will catch wind of it, right, and so that the so-called white woman will have to, experience shame, right, she didn't want to look bad and things of that nature. Right, what would happen was the so-called white woman would play victim, lie, say that, the so-called black man made certain advances and tried to force her to do this, that, and the third. And it led to what? Ultimately, this, Jake man, being put in jail, not even receiving a fair trial, really, because what Esau back then, they didn't really gather all the evidence, and the facts and things of that nature. Right, all they knew is that what they hated your black ass, and that was enough for them to put you to death. So it's the same old playbook with Esau, Edom, the so-called white man. A lot of these stories rooted in the false accusation of a so-called white woman, and because what we know, once again, Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, he has that perpetual hatred towards the children of Israel. So that's what he will use to justify him bringing violence upon our people. It says, soon afterwards, another instance of an assault by a black man on a white woman was reported. These incidents, coming within hours of each other, inflamed a gathering mob. Springfield police took into custody an African-American vagrant, Joe James, for one of the assaults. Another man, George Richardson, a local factory worker, was arrested for the second assault. A mob which had been forming since the news of the assaults was first announced, now quickly assembled at the Sangamon County Courthouse to lynch the two men in custody. Unable to get the accused men, whom the sheriff announced had been moved to an undisclosed location, the mob turned its wrath of two other black men, Scott Burton and William Donegan, who were in the area. They were quickly lynched. And you see, that's also what happened in these cases, right? If these mobs couldn't get to, the so-called perpetrators, right, or the so-called suspects, which in a lot of these instances, right, Jake was innocent, but hey, at the end of the day, it's just these curses, man, but in a lot of these instances, right, if Esau couldn't find the quote unquote true suspects, well, what happened is, he would, lynch, the other so-called blacks around him, and where Esau would try, send a message and invoke fear within our people and things of that nature, which ultimately this goes to show you how this devil get down, man. You know? It says the mob then vented its fury on the homes of black families in Springfield. After rampaging through the city, they extended their violence into small communities outside the city limits. The mob targeted stores which had guns and ammunition. Mob leaders carefully directed the participants to destroy only homes and businesses either owned by blacks or which served black patrons, thus leaving nearby white homes and businesses untouched. And it's talking about black businesses and things of that nature. Oftentimes we talk about Wall Street, right, and things of that nature, because it was a point in time, where Jake was, thriving, maintaining successful businesses and things of that nature. But what ultimately it wasn't meant to, for Jake to thrive and succeed, because we know, the curses tell us. Okay, let's get this in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. And I want to say verse 43. Yep, start at verse 43. It says, the stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. Right, going into what? Ultimately, our enemies being placed above us, and especially in these last days, right, in this current captivity, Esau, even the so-called white man, all right, being above us, the Israelites, all right, the so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans. All right, this is placed upon us due to our disobedience, okay, against the Lord Yahweh by Shem Yahushai. Verse 44, he shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. You see, and this is why ultimately Jake wasn't able to, really, maintain success, especially back then, ultimately going back to the curses. So Jake could have a business, be thriving, making a profit and things of that nature. And then eventually, that shit come to naught. And now you're in a position to where you got to go to Esau for the one of all things, man. So him being the head, Esau being the head, ultimately simply meaning what? He's on top. He's ruling over us, and us being the tail, we're on the bottom. We're in a lower state, right? We're in subjection unto these devils, man. Subjection under these devils. Verse 45, moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Lord Yahweh by Shem Yahushai thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee. And they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. You see, and a lot of our people, right, they tend to wonder why we, as a nation have gone through, so much violence, undergone so much cruelty and things of that nature throughout history. Well, we're reading you the answer right here in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. All right, ultimately is rooted in our disobedience against the Lord Yahweh by Shem Yahushai. That's why we couldn't succeed. That's why we couldn't prosper. Because at the end of the day, we broke our contract with the Lord Yahweh by Shem Yahushai. All right, and with our breaching of the contract, ultimately a penalty came for it, man. The penalty being what? The curses. Verse 47, because thou servest not the Lord Yahweh by Hashem Yahushai thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart, for the abundance of all things. You see, so that's the point, man. Jake, starting businesses, trying to make a profit and things of that nature, it doesn't hold up, forever. Hey, man, we weren't meant to succeed in this place, man. Here in America, all right, we were sitting here, okay, to serve out our judgment for being disobedient to the Lord Yahweh by Shem Yahushai. For breaching the contract, for breaching the covenant, man. But reading on, it says, some Springfield blacks fought back in self-defense. they shot back when fired upon, and the first victim of the lynch mob, Scott Burton, used his shotgun in an attempt to save his life and home. The second victim lynched was an 84-year-old cobbler named William Donegan, whose reputation had been tainted in the eyes of the mob by the fact that he had been married to a white woman for over 30 years. And Esau don't like that, man. You see? Esau don't like that. You know, when the white woman is heavily attracted towards the so-called black man, you know, the Jake man in general, you know, hey, that's going on today. You know, when you when you look at videos and things of that nature, you know, of you know, a white woman, you know, being attracted to the Jake man, because what, you got these little influencers and whatnot, you know, they were wearing a little microphone on their shirt and shit, you know, going out, you know, talking to bitches and things of that nature, you know, trying to spit game and shit like that, you know. Hey, it'd be videos where, you know, the Jake man is, you know, wooing a so-called white woman, and what, you look in the comments, you got all these disgruntled white men talking about some, you know, calling the so-called white woman, you know, a mud shark. You know, that's what they call white women who are into so-called black women, you know, mud sharks. And really, man, it's just Esau being shitty that, you know, he ain't got his woman. Really. You know, his woman is more inclined towards the Israelite man. You know, so, these Edomites, man, they say shit, you know, on YouTube shorts and things of that nature, you know, about, you know, a white woman, you know, being attracted to a so-called black man. You see, well, hey, look what they was doing back then. You know? Hey, they was killing Jake for that shit. So that nature is still in them to this very day. Really, when these white dudes, you know, be on the comments and things of that nature of these different videos, you know, throwing slurs and shit out there, they really want to kill you Jakes. Okay? Ultimately, we know it's rooted in the perpetual hatred that Esau, even the so-called white man, has for the children of Israel. But hey, when they see the so-called black man with the so-called white woman, man, shit. Boy, Esau ass ready to flip tables. You know? But hey, this is an 84-year-old man who can't even defend himself, man. You know? Let's get this in the book of Isaiah, the 47th chapter. Right? In verse 6, it says, I was wroth with my people, I have polluted mine inheritance, and given them into thine hand. You see, and ultimately, who's the Lord's inheritance? Us, the Israelites. You know, and what the Lord said, he was wroth with us, you know, angry. Okay, because what? Once again, we breached that covenant. You know, we went against the agreement. All right, that the Lord Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai had established with us. You know, we didn't hold up our end of the deal. Okay, and due to that, what the Lord gave us into the hands of these nations. Right, primarily, and in this captivity, okay, Esau, even the so-called white man. It says, thou didst show them no mercy. Upon the ancient hast thou very heavily laid thy yoke. You see, so hey, even the elderly of our people, you know, this devil ain't showing no mercy upon them. So this is why, as it says in James, the 2nd chapter, and verse 13, it says, for he shall have a judgment without mercy that has showed no mercy. And mercy rejoiceth against judgment. You see, so because Esau, even the so-called white man, has not shown any mercy, okay, upon the Lord's chosen people, guess what? He's not going to receive any mercy. Okay, and you can read about that when you look it up in the when you read the Zondervan's Compact Bible Dictionary and you look into the definition of Edom. All right, it says what? He is the only neighbor of the Israelites not promised any mercy from Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai. You see, and the scriptures completely support that. We're going into them. Now, what do we read earlier? Amos 1:11. The Lord said he will not turn away the punishment of Edom. You know? So, reading on, it says, when the carnage finally ended, 6 black people were shot and killed. 2 were lynched and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of property destroyed. About 2,000 black people were driven out of the city of Springfield as a result of the riot. About 150 suspected mob participants were arrested. Hey, we already know what the end result of that was. None of them, convicted or arrested or had certain charges held against them, because what the scriptures say in Psalm 73, that what they are not in trouble as other men. Hey, this is their kingdom. This is their kingdom, so they can get away, with anything. That's what it seems like. But hey, we know the true just judge is getting ready to come back and ultimately, execute righteous judgment. That's our Lord Yahweh Shai. All right, coming back to destroy America. And after America is destroyed, beginning with the top wicked elite of Edom, all right, and these other nations, they're going head first into slavery. Okay. And after Esau, Edom serves 1,000 years, all right, under the Israelites, whatever remaining of his nation is going to be gathered together and burned up. And there shall be none remaining of the house of Esau, for the Lord Yahweh Bashem Yahushua has spoken it. You see? So it may seem like Esau, Edom, so-called white man, is getting away with this madness, But hey, we know the Lord Yahweh Bashem Yahushua is long-suffering. Okay? And ultimately, Esau, he's only been able to, carry on as long as he has, because the Lord has allowed it for prophecy's sake, man. It says threats from other mob participants restrain people from testifying against those suspected of the violence. It says later it was revealed that George Richardson, who was initially charged with assault, had been wrongly identified, and the indictment was dismissed. It says the Springfield riot made the capital of Illinois and the home of Abraham Lincoln the center of national attention, especially since this was the first race riot in the North in over half a century. Perhaps the most lasting consequence of the riot was its impetus. Let's see if we can get what that means real quick. I don't know what that means. It says the force or energy with which a body moves is something that makes a process or activity happen more quickly. It says momentum, motivation. It says perhaps the most lasting consequence of the riot was its impetus in getting white reformers such as Jane Addams and black civil rights activists such as W.E.B. Du Bois to create the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People 1 year later, following an interracial conference in upstate New York. And first off, you had no business, joining right with a so-called white woman, to even create that little organization, whatever. Scriptures say what? Never trust thine enemy. Hey, as much as the white woman, is attracted to us and things of that nature, man. All right, that bitch is still our enemy too. Because they're responsible for a lot of this shit that happened to Jake, okay, in history, So that's the end of the article right there. Without further ado, I'm going to get a couple more precepts, and as always, that'll be the lesson. Let's go to the book of Joel, the 3rd chapter, in verse 19. It says, Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom shall be a desolate wilderness, which this speaks to spiritual Egypt, being America today. All right, the house of bondage for the Israelites in the last days. You see, it says, and Edom shall be a desolate wilderness for the violence against the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. You see, so ultimately the Lord is requiring, all right, all the blood of his chosen people that you have shed, okay, here in this land, here in America. All right, do it not say in Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter? All right, real quick, let's get this, okay. In verse 15, it says, that which had been is now, and that which is to be hath already been, and the heavenly Father requireth that which is past. You see, so what? All the things that, Esau, Edom, the so-called white man has done into us, right, in the past, man. All right, the Lord is going to require that, okay? And Esau, Edom, the so-called white man is going to have to pay for everything that he's done unto us as a nation. You see? And how is he going to pay for it? Well, we read what in Numbers, not Numbers, but Joel 3. What they have shed blood and they have shed innocent blood in this land. And what we know according to Numbers 35 and 33, right, that ultimately you can't, that blood defiles the land, and that land cannot be cleansed therein, but by the blood of him that shed it. You see, so what? The Lord's going to cleanse this land, all right, with destruction, the nuclear destruction. Okay, that's going to be the recompense that the Lord Yahweh Bashim Yahushai brings upon this place for all the evil, right, that Esau, Edom, the so-called white man has committed against us as a people. You see? And also for all this, because what? Esau, Edom's judgment doesn't stop there. All right, for all this, what's Esau's final destination? All right, let's end it off with Obadiah 1 and 18. It says, and the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble, and they shall kindle in them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for the Lord Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, hath spoken it. You see? And the Heavenly Father Yahweh said what? That his word shall not come back unto him void. So what does that mean? Esau's done for. All right. He's going to lose his precious kingdom, go into slavery, beginning with his top wicked elite. All right. They're going to serve out the captivity for 1,000 years. And after that, whatever's remaining of them is going to be rounded up and completely burned up, man. And there's not going to be another Edomite to walk the planet Earth ever again. So I'm going to go ahead and close out right there. I pray that this lesson was edifying and informative to the elect body of the nation of Israel. And without further ado, I would like to close out by giving all the praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Rechakudash. And double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who were well and preached his truth and sincerity. Shalom to the hopefully elect. Lord's will I see you in the next lesson. Till then, I say shalom.